battle, the Germans would prove very adept at organizing themselves into ad hoc fighting units.
The German ability to organize and create these ad hoc battle groups had a significant impact on what happened here. It's important to bear in mind, however, that the effectiveness of those ad hoc battle groups would vary with the quality of the individual soldiers contained in them. And while that might seem like a self-evident statement, and indeed it is, the fact remains that there's a significant difference between the ability of the German staff to organise things and on paper make them look as if they will work, and to have the non-commissioned officers and junior officers in place to actually make them work on the ground. And that's, in a sense, why the lower grade soldiers, although properly organised into battle groups, were effective, let's be in no doubt. Lack of coordination and control, and that's a feature of the fact that they weren't properly formed units, not properly formed divisions, they didn't have the radios and so on and so forth, because they did very well with what they had, would have affected adversely their ability to conduct operations. With the Waffen-SS who were here, the 9th SS in particular, whose focus was on the perimeter, they were given orders by their officers to junior non-commissioned officers, more or less march to the sound of the guns, and when you get there, do something. Knowing full well that when they got there, they were trained, competent and aggressive enough to physically do something which would have an impact on operations. And indeed, Sepp Kraft's stopping of the move of the Airborne Division by ambush, getting himself into position, putting out the early patrols, stopping Freddie Goff's Jeep Squadron with that first ambush, and then slowing down the 3rd Parachute Battalion with his left-hand company, really a significant effect purely on the initiative of a junior German officer and junior non-commissioned officers who just did what they were trained to do to the standards that they were trained to do them, which were very high indeed.
By the end of the first day, the Paras had had mixed fortunes. The 1st Battalion had been due to advance along the northern Leopard route, but it had run into the Recce Squadron, who informed them that there was a great deal of resistance ahead. In order to try and outflank the Germans, 1st Battalion headed north towards the Amsterdamsweg main road. But the lightly armed airborne soldiers met German infantry, supported by tanks. With no means of fighting armour, the Paras abandoned the main road and tried to press on through the woods. The 3rd Battalion, following the middle Tiger route, was also having a difficult time and was locked into a firefight in woods that would last for several hours. In order to try and outflank the Germans, C Company was ordered north to follow the railway line to the bridge. Although C Company would succeed in getting through, their progress was fraught with difficulty.
So we got down that steep slope onto the railway line and we began moving on towards Arnhem. Now, any one of you that have walked along railway lines will know that they are spaced wrongly. You cannot march properly. I mean, you're going along like this. Oh, my dear, sort of thing. It's that sort of a movement all the time. But there was one important thing we learnt very early on, and that was instead of having the rifle slung on the right-hand shoulder, onto the left, because the signal wires were down there, and if the butt struck the signal wires, it yang, 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 sending a telegram forward to anybody who was up there.
2nd Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, were advancing along the southern Lion route and had made much better progress. The route took them along the banks of the Rhine, where Dutch civilians poured out of their houses to press refreshments on the men as they marched. One of the battalion's first objectives had been to capture the rail bridge which traversed the Rhine at Oosterbeek. This would then enable the battalion to advance towards Arnhem on both sides of the river, so that both ends of the road bridge could be taken. C Company was detached to take the rail bridge, but as the men approached, the Germans detonated charges, demolishing the centre span. The bridge was abandoned, and the column, almost a mile in length, continued its march towards Arnhem. By the time it was getting dark at 7, A Company had reached the northern end of the bridge. Having advanced through houses and gardens to avoid costly confrontations, the Paras found the bridge lightly defended. But attempts to take the southern end were defeated. The paint of the bridge was ignited during the attempt, then a column of German lorries added to the inferno when it was attacked as it tried to cross the bridge from the south. Meanwhile, to the south, the 101st Airborne operation just to the north of Eindhoven had gone well, and most of the division's objectives had been achieved by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But at Sonn, a handful of German trainees blew the bridge that spans the Wilhelmina Canal just as the paratroopers arrived. This was the only crossing point, and so the advance stalled while they waited for 30 Corps' heavy bridging equipment to arrive. By the time a new bridge had been laid, 30 Corps were 36 hours behind schedule. Further north, the 82nd's attempt to capture its bridges also met with mixed fortune. Rather than try and take the road bridge at Nijmegen, the division's efforts were directed to securing the Grusbeck Heights, some 5 miles away. It had been feared that a large German force might be assembling in the heights, and given that the high ground overlooked the route being taken by 30 Corps, great importance was attached to their capture. It was a costly distraction, which would cost the 82nd and 30 Corps dearly in terms of time and men. It required the firepower of 30 Corps' armour and an almost suicidal river assault, something that airborne troops were not trained for, before the bridge at Nijmegen was captured on the evening of Wednesday the 20th.
If you look to your left, you can see some power lines going across the river. They come back to a power station which is just out of your sight, but you can see part of the structure down at the end of this row of houses. And it was from that power station that the boats were launched. Why were they launched in the first place? The reason is that Gavin was in trouble. He'd lost 300 dead or wounded. He'd lost 700, God knows where. His third lift wasn't coming in because of trouble in the UK airfields due to fog. The same thing was afflicting the Poles trying to land north of here at Arnhem, which is just about 11 miles in that direction. And at the same time, between here and Weigel, which was the town we got meshed around in as we were trying to find our way up here, the Germans were trying to break through. So he was having to look over his shoulder at what was going on behind him and look forward at what he was trying to achieve in front. And he decided that the only way to cross this river and get these bridges was to take them at both ends and bounce a river crossing. So he ordered the 504th to do it. And the attack was led by 2 companies, H&I companies of the US 504th Parachute Infantry, in British boats, 19 feet long, 13 men to a boat, equipped with 3 paddles. And the reason for the 3 paddles was that 3 people came with each boat, and they were the crew. Because once the boat had got across the river, it would have to get back, and you needed a crew to do that. And these were canvas and plywood boats, flat-bottomed, which the Americans had never seen before. Julian Cook described it as on-the-job training. And they launched their boats with the Irish guards along the side of this bank firing smoke from their tanks onto the river on the other side to try and obscure the vision and the view of the Germans who could see these tanks crossing the river, these boats crossing the river. Speaking to an American who was involved in that attack and asking him how thick the smoke screen was, there was a group of 40 people, and he said if you all lit up a cigar now, there would be more smoke than we had on the day.
By an immense stroke of luck, the charges that the Germans had laid on the bridge failed to detonate as the first British tanks began to cross. But time was running out for the men of the 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem. By dawn on Monday the 18th of September, it was clear that the men of the 2nd Battalion holding the northern end of the bridge at Arnhem were completely surrounded. Nevertheless, confidence was high, for their numbers had been increased during the night by the arrival of reinforcements from 1st and 3rd Battalions. In all, there was a force of 740 men in positions in the buildings around the bridge's northern ramp.
You'll gather that if you're in urban fighting, there's only one place to be, and that's indoors. Whether it's raining or not, it's the best place to be, rather than outside trying to get in, because the Germans did try all the way through that Sunday night and Monday and Tuesday. The attacks went on incessantly, and so did the noise. You couldn't just stop and quietly start thinking really about much, because of this deafening noise all the time, with the small arms fire, the machine gun fire, with the mortar bombs, with the shell fire, because the chappies the other side of the river, those guns were firing at us as well as the mortars, and so we had to tension and retension ourselves with that. Well, I had, as all the officers had, a little bottle full of benzodrine pills.